But first tonight, Thursday, a judge will decide if we, the people, get to see the probable cause affidavit justifying the search of Mar-a-Lago. The Justice Department cites national security in their argument to keep it secret. Democrats and many of our colleagues in the news media think that finally, this is the thing that is going to sink Donald Trump. Here's MSNBC's Rachel Maddow after the initial raid.
Tonight's news that the FBI has raided the home of the immediate past president of the United States. It feels both astonishing and sort of inevitable in equal measure. Before Republican President Donald J. Trump, we'd never before had a president impeached twice in a single term. We don't know where this will lead in legal terms. We don't know where this will lead in historic terms. We do not know where this will lead in terms of the behavior of the former president and his supporters. And that is a moment that is worth appreciating.
Her giddiness could be real. It could be justified. It could not be as well. Keep this in mind. Through all the other ideological car wrecks of President Trump's political life and the gotcha moments, warranted or not, Donald Trump has managed to walk away with just a few scrapes and bruises. In fact, he's up 10 points among Republicans since the raid. His Houdini escapes from scandals and impeachments goes a little bit like this. I didn't do what I'm accused of. Even if I did it, it isn't wrong. And if I did do it and it is wrong, well, then someone else is at fault. And we have seen that playbook over the past week, over and over and over again. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times reports Trump World thinks the former president will sacrifice then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Certainly some would argue he's been a political liability for a long time. And Trump's history of letting other people take the rap is well known. Rudy Giuliani is now the target of a Georgia grand jury subpoena for election crimes. Longtime lawyer Michael Cohen went to jail for fixing Trump's problems. Roger Stone got a pardon. Paul Manafort faced charges out of the Russia investigation. Most notably, Trump accountant Andrew Weissmann will reportedly plead guilty to a tax scheme for Trump executives. So now it comes down to Mark Meadows. He can follow the long line of fall guys and make the ultimate sacrifice for his boss, take responsibility for this classified material at Mar-a-Lago, or he could turn on Trump, something high-ranking Republicans have yet to do. Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, NewsNation senior contributor George Will with us now. George, for all of the folks ready to measure an orange jumpsuit for Donald Trump, are they underestimating his ability to get out of things over and over and over again?
They're underestimating that ability because they're underestimating the difficulty of capturing him in the cobweb of the law. He's a kind of locomotive, and he steams right through this cobweb because, take, for example, January 6th. It's very difficult to establish that his words, A, incited, and inciting caused the mob to go to Capitol Hill. Try and imagine that argument in front of a jury or in front of a judge in a court. It's very difficult to catch Mr. Trump in these fine distinctions that we want to be fine distinctions. We want the law to be difficult to bring people to a conviction on matters of speech and political advocacy.
Are we right to ask who is the target and who is the fall guy potentially in this investigation? So far, we don't even know that President Trump is the actual target of the investigation. Could be President Trump held responsible for packing these boxes, could be Mark Meadows, could be a multitude of people who didn't necessarily know it was wrong. Intent is part of the law. The list goes on.
The list goes on, and then first of all, you have to make the distinction that what Mr. Trump did was substantially different than what Hillary Clinton did with the classified material on her private server. That what he did is substantially different and criminal in a way that Mr. Obama taking, 30 million pages of documents to his, will be his library in Chicago. The big winner in all this, it seems to me, at this point, Leland, are the Democrats. Because when people are talking about Trump, they're not talking about inflation. When they're talking about Trump, they're not talking about the Afghanistan chaos at the Kabul airport. The Democrats' strategy for 2022 is keep Trump, not Biden, front and center.
I think about the long list of people who have taken falls for President Trump, and we want to correct a name. Alan Weisselberg is the Trump Trump accountant who is expected to plead guilty in this tax scheme. How is it that he engenders such loyalty from people and then shows so little loyalty in return?
Well, that's sort of the playbook written by Machiavelli called The Prince, which is politics isn't about loyalty. It's about power, and it's about survival. And Mr. Trump buys the affection of a lot of people, and when their sell-by date passes, he gets rid of them. Politics is often not about loyalty, and with Mr. Trump, it is never about loyalty.
At the same time, though, his voters remain loyal. We just have to look at what's happening in Alaska with Lisa Murkowski, certainly look at what's happening in Wyoming with Liz Cheney, who's almost certainly going to lose in her primary tonight. That even predicting his death within the Republican Party politically is one thing that's been done many times and has never proved true.
Mr. Trump proves an axiom, Leland, and it is this. Obviously, democratic politics of a democracy is about numbers, who gets the largest number of votes, but it's also about intensity, because intensity drives people to the polls. It's August. Most people are not thinking about politics. Primaries in August. Who goes out and votes in an August primary? The answer is people who are intense about politics. And the intensity in American politics today is in the Trump base.
No question about that. And they certainly have been fired up in his defense over the past couple of days. George, it's good to see you as always. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.